Have you ever realized the people applauding you the loudest were already planning how to erase you? I was 68 years old when I learned the answer. And it happened in the middle of my own retirement party. My name is Lorraine Caldwell. I had worked for 32 years as the operations director at a mid-sized manufacturing company in Ohio called Brookfield Industrial Solutions. I didn't own it. I didn't inherit it. I helped build it quietly, steadily, while other people took credit. That night, the conference room was filled with balloons, catered food, polite laughter, and speeches about my loyalty. My supervisor hugged me too long. My stepson clapped a little too enthusiastically. My daughter-in-law avoided my eyes altogether. I thought the knot in my stomach was nerve. It wasn't. It was instinct. When the speeches ended, I noticed something odd. My access badge didn't work anymore. I had chalked it up to an early system update, but the IT manager wouldn't meet my eyes when I asked. That should have been my first clue. The second came an hour later, when my son Daniel pulled me aside near the coat rack. "Mom," he said, lowering his voice, "we need to talk about the house." The house. The one I had paid off after my husband passed away. The one I had added his name to after he got married, because you said it would make things easier someday. "What about it?" I asked. He smiled tightly. "We're just thinking ahead. You know, planning. You don't really need all that space anymore." Behind him, my daughter-in-law Paige laughed softly at something someone said, her hand resting possessively on Daniel's arm. I felt something shift, not fear, recognition. That night, after the guests left and the banners came down, I checked my email. There it was. An internal memo set company-wide. Announcement of leadership restructuring, effective immediately. My role was listed as retired, past tense, final. Below it was the name of my replacement, Paige Caldwell, my daughter-in-law. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in my party dress, reading it again and again. This wasn't retirement. This was removal. The open loop revealed itself, slowly, painfully. In the following days, phone calls stopped. Invitations disappeared. Thanksgiving plans changed without consulting me. Christmas was suddenly being hosted at Paige's parents' newly renovated home. When I asked Daniel why I wasn't included, he sighed as if I were exhausting. "You've had your turn, Mom." That sentence followed me into my sleep. Then, the bank letter arrived. It informed me that my home equity line had been increased. Not requested by me, but approved using digital authorization tied to my old company credentials. I knew immediately. They hadn't just pushed me out. They had stepped into my place. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the letter, my hands cold, my chest burning. I wasn't confused. I wasn't imagining things. I was being rewritten out of my own life. And the worst part was this. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought age had softened me into silence. They were wrong. But at that moment, I didn't yet understand how deep the betrayal ran. I was still about to learn what they had done with my name, my work, my trust, and how far they were willing to go to keep it. The first thing you lose when people decide you're obsolete is your voice. Not all at once. It happens quietly, through decisions made without you, through conversations that stop when you enter the room, through paperwork that suddenly feels heavier in your hands. Paige stopped calling me Lorraine after my retirement party. She started calling me Mom Lorraine. It sounded affectionate. It wasn't. Within 2 weeks, she was signing company emails with my old title. She had my office, my staff, even my assistant who avoided my eyes when I dropped by to collect the framed photo of my late husband from the desk. Daniel told me to be proud. "You trained her," he said. "This is your legacy." Legacy. That word made me nauseous. The next betrayal came disguised as concern. Paige suggested I meet with a financial advisor she trusted. Said it would help me adjust to retirement. Said she worried I was overwhelmed. I went because refusing would have looked defensive. The advisor greeted me warmly, then slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents authorizing temporary management of my assets. "Temporary," Paige said sweetly. "Just until things settle." I read the fine print. Power of attorney. Limited, but expandable. Signed with my digital credentials. I hadn't signed it. I closed the folder slowly. Paige watched me with carefully neutral eyes. "You don't remember," she said gently. Daniel reached for my hand. "Mom, You've been under a lot of stress. There it was. The narrative, not betrayal. Concern, not theft. Protection. I went home that afternoon and opened my filing cabinet. I am not a dramatic woman. I don't scream. I don't throw things. I document. I found emails Paige had forwarded to herself months earlier. Financial forecasts with my annotations. Strategy drafts, copied into her personal account. I listened to voicemails from Daniel asking me to approve things quickly. Trust him, not overthink. I pulled my employment contract from Brookfield Industrial Solutions and noticed something new. An amendment, dated 6 months earlier, signed digitally by me. Except it wasn't my signature. It was close. Too close. That night, I sat alone at my dining table. Thanksgiving place settings still in the cabinet, untouched. I realized then that this wasn't just family drama. This was workplace betrayal. This was identity theft. This was inheritance manipulation, happening in real time. And they were counting on one thing: that I would stay quiet to keep the peace, that I would choose family over justice, that I would be ashamed to admit what my own son had allowed. I didn't sleep. Instead, I wrote down every name, every date, every dollar. I didn't call Daniel. I didn't confront Paige. I called a lawyer I hadn't spoken to in years, a woman named Evelyn Ross, who specialized in corporate transitions and elder financial abuse. When she answered, I said only one thing: I think my family is stealing my life. There was a pause. Then she said, come in tomorrow. Bring everything. As I hung up, my phone buzzed. A message from Paige. Don't worry, Mom Lorraine. We'll take care of everything from here. I stared at the screen, my reflection faint in the glass. They thought the story was already over. They had no idea it had just begun. Evelyn Ross didn't interrupt me once. I talked for almost 40 minutes. About Brookfield, about Paige, about Daniel, about the house, the bank letter, the amended contract, the way people suddenly spoke to me, as if I were already half gone. When I finally stopped, my throat was raw and my hands were shaking. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. Lorraine, she said carefully, this is not miscommunication. This is a coordinated removal. That phrase lodged itself in my chest. She explained it slowly, methodically. The way you explain something heavy so it doesn't crush the person hearing it. Paige had positioned herself inside the company before my retirement was official. Daniel had access to my personal financial accounts through shared passwords I never thought to change. My digital signature had been copied, not hacked in a dramatic way, but harvested over time. Emails, approvals, clicks I'd trusted them to handle. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a project, and I was the raw material. We can stop it, Evelyn said. But we can't do it loudly. Not yet. She laid out the first steps. Freeze assets. Revoke digital authorizations. Notify the bank of potential fraud without triggering family alerts. Place a legal hold on my former company files. And then she said the part that made my stomach drop. Lorraine, if Paige suspects what you're doing, she will accelerate. They'll push to declare you unfit. That's the fastest way to lock you out completely. I thought of the way Paige had said, you don't remember. The way Daniel had squeezed my hand like I was a child. They were already laying the groundwork. I left Evelyn's office feeling like I was walking through glass. Every step deliberate, every breath measured. That evening, Daniel came over unannounced. He stood in my doorway, holding a grocery bag like a peace offering. Paige thought you might not be eating properly, he said. I let him in. He talked. About stress, about how hard things were at the company, about how Paige was under pressure and just trying to do her best. I listened. Then I asked him one simple question. Did you know they amended my contract? His face went still. Mom, did you know? He looked away. I felt something break cleanly inside me. Not anger, grief, because that was the moment I understood. My son wasn't confused or manipulated. He had chosen. I stood up. Daniel, I said quietly, I need you to leave. He looked startled. You're upset. No, I said. I'm done. He tried to argue, but I opened the door and waited. When he left, he looked smaller than I remembered. That night, I slept for exactly 2 hours. At 3 a.m, my phone lit up with a notification. My access to the company cloud had been revoked. Paige was moving. Faster now. Paige invited me to lunch the next day. She chose a place near the company, Glass walls, bright lighting, public enough to discourage scenes. She smiled when she saw me, that practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Mom, Lorraine," she said warmly. "I'm glad you came." She ordered for both of us. "You've seemed distant lately," she continued. "Daniel's worried." I stirred my soup slowly. "You revoked my access to company files last night." Her smile didn't falter. "We're streamlining. It's standard after leadership changes." "Leadership changes," I repeated. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "Lorraine, let's not make this harder than it needs to be. You've had a long, successful career, but it's time to let go." There it was. I looked at her carefully, at the tailored blazer, the subtle jewelry, the confidence she wore like armor. "You used my signature," I said. Her eyes flickered for just a moment. "You don't have proof." I smiled faintly. She sat back, reassessing. "I want to help you," she said, "but you need to cooperate. Fighting this will only make people question your judgment." I felt the heat rise in my chest. This was the play. Gaslight. Isolate. Replace. I paid the bill and stood. "Paige," I said calmly, "you built your career on my work. You stepped into my life the same way, quietly, without asking." She laughed softly. "Don't be dramatic." I met her eyes. "You've mistaken my silence for weakness." Her expression hardened. "You're not as relevant as you think anymore." I left without responding. That afternoon, Evelyn called. "They filed a motion," she said. "Emergency corporate injunction. They're claiming you're interfering post-retirement." I closed my eyes. "And the bank?" "Your accounts are frozen pending review. Temporarily." The word temporarily rang hollow. That evening, I received an email from Brookfield's board. They wanted a meeting. No Daniel, no Paige, just me. I sat in my car outside the building, watching people I once mentored walk past without looking at me. My phone buzzed. A text from Paige. "Don't embarrass yourself." I turned off my phone. Inside that building were years of my life. And tomorrow, I would finally speak. Not as someone's mother, not as someone's predecessor, but as the woman they underestimated. Because the truth had teeth, and it was about to bite back. The boardroom still smelled the same. Polished wood, burnt coffee, a faint metallic hum from the lights overhead. I had spent decades in that room, quietly shaping outcomes while louder people took credit. Walking back into it felt like stepping into a memory that didn't recognize me anymore. 5 board members sat waiting. 2 of them avoided my eyes. 1 nodded stiffly. The chairwoman, Marlene Hughes, gestured for me to sit. "Thank you for coming, Lorraine," she said. "We wanted to hear directly from you." Directly. Not through Paige, not through Daniel. Not through legal memos written to erase me. I took a breath. I began with facts. I spoke about the amended contract I had never signed. The internal files transferred to Paige's personal account. The sudden revocation of access timed perfectly with my questions. The attempted financial control disguised as concern. I did not cry. I did not accuse emotionally. I laid everything out, like an audit. When I finished, the room was quiet. Marlene finally spoke. "Why didn't you raise this sooner?" "Because I trusted my family," I said. "And because I believed loyalty still mattered here." One board member cleared his throat. "Paige told us you were struggling to let go." I nodded. "That's convenient." I slid a folder across the table. Inside were timestamps, email headers, digital signature discrepancies, copies of strategy drafts Paige had presented as her own months before my retirement. "This isn't about letting go," I said. "This is about theft, corporate and personal." The chairwoman leaned forward now. "Lorraine," she said carefully, "are you formally alleging misconduct?" I met her gaze. "Yes." And as I said the word, I felt something inside me steady. Not rage. Ground. The meeting ended without resolution, but something had shifted. They weren't dismissing me anymore. As I stood to leave, Marlene stopped me. "Lorraine, whatever happens next, this won't stay quiet." I nodded. "I'm done being quiet." That night, Paige called. Her voice was no longer sweet. "What did you say to them?" "The truth." "You're blowing this out of proportion." I laughed once. Short, sharp. "You built your position on my silence. That silence is over." She hung up. 10 minutes later, Daniel called. "Mom, please, you're hurting us." I closed my eyes. "No," I said. I stopped letting you hurt me. The next morning, the company announced an internal investigation. Paige was placed on temporary leave. The house was suddenly very quiet, but I knew better than to relax. People like Paige don't retreat. They redirect. And I was about to find out where. The knock came just after 8 the next morning. 2 people stood on my porch. A man and a woman, both holding clipboards, both wearing expressions practiced to look neutral. "Mrs. Caldwell," the woman said, "we're here to conduct a wellness check." My heart slowed instead of racing. I had expected this. Paige's next move was predictable. Concern had failed. Authority was next. I let them in. They asked questions about my memory, my finances, my daily routine. They glanced around my home, noting what they thought supported their narrative. I answered calmly. Precisely. I showed them my calendar, my records, my correspondence with my attorney, the locks I had changed, the accounts I had secured. When they asked who had requested the check, I said one name, my daughter-in-law. The man raised his eyebrows. "Interesting," he said quietly. They left after 40 minutes. That afternoon, Evelyn called. "They're escalating legally now," she said. "Paige filed a petition claiming you're unfit to manage your affairs. She's asking for temporary conservatorship." I exhaled slowly. "How long?" "Hearing is scheduled in 10 days. 10 days to decide whether I kept my life. 10 days for Paige to paint me as unstable. 10 days for Daniel to sit beside her and look concerned." Evelyn continued. "We're ready, but there's something else you should know." "What?" "Paige has been moving money, not just from you, from the company." I closed my eyes. "She thinks she's untouchable. She thinks the narrative will protect her." Evelyn's voice sharpened. "Lorraine, if this goes to court, everything becomes visible. Family, business, all of it." I thought of the holidays I had already lost. The son who had chosen convenience over truth. "Let it be visible," I said. That evening, I sat alone at my dining table, the same one where I had once hosted loud family dinners. I laid out my documents in neat stacks. Evidence doesn't shout, it waits. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Paige is under a lot of stress. You don't need to make this worse." I typed back one sentence. "You already did." I turned off my phone. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the floor. 10 days. That was how long they had to finish destroying me, or how long I had to make sure they never tried again. And as I gathered my papers, one thought settled clearly in my mind. This wasn't revenge. This was survival. And I was done asking permission to survive. 10 days is a long time when everyone is waiting for you to break. I didn't. Instead, I became methodical. Each morning, I woke before sunrise, brewed coffee, and reviewed one category of evidence: company emails, financial transfers, legal filings. Every afternoon, I met with Evelyn to refine strategy, not emotion. Every evening, I walked my neighborhood until my legs ached, grounding myself in the ordinary so the extraordinary wouldn't swallow me whole. On the 4th day, something unexpected happened. Marlene Hughes called me. "Lorraine," she said, "we need to meet. Off the record." We chose a quiet diner outside town, the kind with chipped mugs and waitresses who didn't ask questions. Marlene arrived without her blazer, her hair pulled back tight. "I'll be direct," she said. "The internal audit has found discrepancies. Paige authorized transfers she shouldn't have, used your old protocols, your access." I nodded. "I know." "Daniel was present for some of those meetings," Marlene continued. "Not officially, but he knew." The confirmation landed heavier than I expected. Not because it surprised me, but because it ended something I'd been unconsciously protecting. "They're trying to pressure the board," Marlene said. "If the conservatorship goes through, they'll argue you're unreliable, and everything collapses back into their control." I sipped my coffee. "What do you need from me?" Her eyes held mine. "Permission to act." I slid a folder across the table. "Then act." That night, Daniel showed up again. He looked thinner, sleepless. His voice shook when he spoke. "Mom, this has gone too far." I leaned against the doorframe, not inviting him in. "Too far was when you let your wife steal my name," I said. "Too far was when you watched and said nothing." He rubbed his face. "Paige is scared." I laughed softly. "So was I. For years." He stepped closer. "If you just cooperate at the hearing, agree to temporary oversight, This can calm down. There it was, the last olive branch, made of thorns. I shook my head. No. His eyes hardened. Then don't be surprised by what happens next. He left without another word. 2 days before the hearing, the company announced Paige's termination. Not suspension, termination, cause pending. The press didn't have details yet, but whispers traveled fast. Paige called me that night, her voice sharp with panic. You planned this. I didn't answer, she texted. You ruined everything. I finally replied with 4 words. You did that yourself. The morning of the hearing, I wore a charcoal suit and my wedding ring. Not for sentiment, for grounding. The courtroom buzzed with quiet judgment before anyone spoke. Paige sat rigid beside Daniel. Her eyes darted, her foot tapped. When the judge asked why this petition was being filed now, Paige's attorney spoke of concern, of confusion, of instability. Then Evelyn stood, and the truth entered the room, not loudly, relentlessly. Emails, audit findings, financial logs, the wellness check request, the timing of my access removal, the attempt to seize control immediately after exposure. The judge listened, asked questions, then asked Paige one simple thing. Why did you not disclose your pending termination to the court? Paige froze. That pause lasted less than 5 seconds. It ended everything. The ruling was swift. Petition denied. Referral for investigation granted. Temporary restraining order issued against Paige and Daniel regarding my finances and property. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. Paige didn't cry. She stared straight ahead, jaw tight, as if she could will the room to rearrange itself. Daniel looked stunned, like a man waking up in a life he no longer recognized. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Not many, just enough. I didn't stop to speak. That afternoon, Evelyn came to my house. It's over legally, she said. For now. The company will proceed independently. Criminal investigations may follow. I sat at my table, exhausted in a way sleep wouldn't fix. And my son. Evelyn's voice softened. He'll have to choose what kind of man he wants to be, without hiding behind her. That evening, the doorbell rang. It was Daniel. No bravado, no threats, just a man stripped of certainty. I let him in. He didn't sit. I didn't offer. I should have stopped it, he said. A long time ago. Yes, he swallowed. I didn't think it would end like this. I met his eyes. It didn't have to. Silence filled the room. Then he asked the question I'd been waiting for. Is there any way back? I thought of the amended contract, the bank letter, the way he'd called me upset instead of apologizing. I answered honestly, I don't know. He nodded slowly, like he'd expected that. When he left, I locked the door and leaned against it, my knees weak. Not from victory. From release. The next week brought fallout. Paige's professional network vanished. Friends distanced themselves. Her parents stopped calling me entirely. Daniel moved out of their house. I spent my days reclaiming small things. Changing locks, updating beneficiaries, restoring my digital life piece by piece. One afternoon, a package arrived. Inside was my old company badge. No note. Just the object that had stopped working the night I was erased. I held it for a long time. Then I dropped it into the trash, because I didn't need proof of where I'd been. I was finally deciding where I was going. But closure is never as clean as we want it to be. That night, as I turned off the lights, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You think this is over. I stared at the screen, heart steady. I typed back one line. It is for me. I turned the phone face down, because whatever storms were left belonged to them. And for the first time since my retirement party, I slept without bracing for impact. Silence is not peace. It is space. And space gives truth room to breathe. The weeks after the hearing felt unreal. My days were suddenly mine, yet my body still reacted as if something might be taken from me at any moment. I flinched when the phone rang. I reread emails twice before answering. Trust, once fractured, doesn't snap back into place. It relearns slowly, if at all. The company investigation moved faster than I expected. Brookfield's board issued a formal statement announcing Paige's termination for cause, citing financial misconduct and unauthorized use of executive credentials. The wording was careful, legal, devastating. It never mentioned my name, but everyone who mattered understood whose shadow hung over every sentence. Daniel resigned 3 days later. Not fired, not pushed, resigned. Evelyn called me that morning. He left before the board could question him under oath, she said. I closed my eyes. Cowardice doesn't always look like running. Sometimes it looks like leaving just early enough to avoid accountability. That afternoon, I drove past the building for the first time since the hearing. The parking lot was half empty. The sign still gleamed. But the place felt hollow now, like a stage after the curtain has fallen. I didn't stop. Instead, I drove to a small office park on the edge of town, where Evelyn had arranged a meeting with a forensic accountant. A quiet man named Thomas Reed, who spoke in numbers and timelines, not feelings. He laid everything out. Paige hadn't just copied my work. She had used my systems to funnel company resources into side accounts, consulting fees, vendor kickbacks, reimbursements approved under my old authorization codes. And Daniel, Thomas added gently, benefited indirectly. Mortgage payments, credit cards, lifestyle support. I stared at the spreadsheet until the numbers blurred. How much? I asked. Enough to ruin them, Thomas said. Enough to explain why they panicked when you noticed. I thought of Paige's smile at that lunch. The confidence, the assumption that concern would protect her. It never occurred to her that truth doesn't need volume. It needs evidence. That evening, Daniel called. I almost didn't answer, but I did. His voice sounded hollow, scraped thin. I moved out, he said. Paige is staying with her parents. I said nothing. He kept talking, about mistakes, about pressure, about not knowing how things got so far. I listened until he finished. Then I said the hardest thing I had ever said to my child. I know how it got so far. You let it. Silence. I'm not asking you to fix this, he said quietly. I just didn't want you to hear it from someone else. I closed my eyes. I already did. After we hung up, I sat alone in the living room as the light faded. I realized then that revenge doesn't always feel like triumph. Sometimes it feels like clarity without comfort. And clarity is lonely. 2 days later, the district attorney's office called Evelyn. They were opening a formal investigation, not into me, into them. And as the truth widened, I understood something that surprised me. This wasn't about punishing Paige or Daniel. It was about removing their ability to hurt anyone else the way they hurt me. The final reckoning was no longer in my hands. But the consequences were about to land, and I didn't know how Daniel would survive them. Daniel asked to meet me on a Sunday morning, not at my house, not at his, at a small park halfway between us, where we used to take his bike when he was little. I arrived early and sat on a bench, watching the trees sway gently in the fall air. The world didn't feel heavy that morning. It felt resolved, like something had already ended, even if the echoes remained. He arrived late. He looked older, not just tired. Older in the way people look when denial has finally burned off and left only reality behind. He sat beside me, leaving a careful distance. I've been questioned, he said. I nodded. They know about the accounts, about Paige using Mom's credentials. I waited. They know I knew, he added. There it was. The truth without decoration. I don't know what's going to happen, he said. I might be charged or barred from certain positions. Everything I built is gone. I looked at him then. Really looked. He wasn't asking for money. He wasn't asking for protection. He was asking for absolution. I spoke slowly. When you were a boy, I thought my job was to shield you from consequences, to soften every fall. I told myself that was love. He stared at the ground. I was wrong. His shoulders slumped. Love isn't removing consequences, I continued. It's preparing someone to survive them. He swallowed hard. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said. I stood. Forgiveness isn't a transaction, Daniel. It's a process, and it starts with accountability, not regret. He looked up, eyes red. What do I do now? I thought for a moment. You live with what you did, I said. You tell the truth when asked. You don't ask me to rescue you. And you figure out who you are without standing on someone else's life. I walked away before he could respond. That night, I packed away the last box of company memorabilia. Awards, plaques, letters. I didn't destroy them. I didn't honor them either. I stored them. They belonged to a chapter that was closed. The following week, Paige was formally charged with financial fraud and identity misuse. Daniel was named, but not charged, pending cooperation. The media never contacted me again. My story had served its purpose. I returned to my routines. Morning coffee, long walks, reading without checking my phone every 5 minutes. I began consulting independently for small companies who wanted my experience, not my silence. One afternoon, I received a letter from Daniel. No excuses, no requests. Just a page of handwriting acknowledging everything he had done and everything he had lost. At the bottom, one line. I don't deserve a place in your life, but I hope someday I can earn peace in my own. I folded the letter and placed it in my drawer, not as forgiveness, as truth. Because revenge isn't loud. It isn't cruel. Sometimes it's simply stepping back far enough that people finally feel the weight of what they've done. And in that space, I found something better than vindication. I found myself again, and I was ready for whatever came next. I thought accountability would bring closure. I was wrong. It brought distance instead. Months passed. Winter softened into early spring. The investigations moved forward without me. Court dates were scheduled, postponed, rescheduled again. Paige's name surfaced in places I never looked. Daniel's name surfaced in places I did. I was no longer asked to testify. That was deliberate. Evelyn explained it gently one afternoon, as we sat across from each other in her office. "You're no longer the victim they need on the stand," she said. "The evidence speaks for itself. And honestly, Lorraine, the system doesn't want your pain anymore. It got what it needed." I nodded. That was when I understood something deeply unsettling. Justice doesn't heal you. It just stops the bleeding. The rest is up to you. I filled my days carefully. I began consulting part-time for small manufacturing startups in neighboring counties. No titles, no corner offices, just work. Honest work. The kind where my experience mattered and my name wasn't being borrowed. People listened to me again. That mattered more than I expected. One afternoon, while reviewing a process flow at a small plant, I caught my reflection in the window. Same face, same lines, but my shoulders were no longer pulled inward. I stood differently now. At home, the house felt quieter, but not emptier. I moved furniture, donated things I'd been holding on to out of obligation rather than love. I repainted the guest room a soft gray and turned it into an office. Not for the company, for me. Daniel didn't contact me again for weeks. Then one evening, as I was cooking dinner, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but I did. "Mom," he said softly, "I just wanted you to know. I'm cooperating fully." I didn't respond immediately. "They offered a reduced penalty if I testify against Paige," he continued. I accepted. I closed my eyes. That was the sound of a man finally choosing responsibility over pride. "I'm not calling for help," he said quickly. "I just didn't want you to hear it from someone else again." "Thank you for telling me," I said. Nothing more. Nothing less. After the call, I sat at the table for a long time, staring at the steam rising from my untouched food. This was what detachment felt like. Not anger. Not forgiveness. Acceptance without rescue. That night, I slept deeply. The final chapter didn't arrive with a verdict. It arrived quietly, on a warm Sunday afternoon, almost a year after my retirement party. I was in my backyard, planting herbs along the fence line, when I realized I hadn't thought about Paige in weeks. Not with rage, not with fear, not at all. That was when I knew the story was finally over. Daniel sent one last letter, short, unembellished. He had relocated, taken a job far below his previous position. He didn't complain. He didn't explain. He didn't ask. He ended with a single sentence. "I am learning how to live without shortcuts." I folded the letter and placed it with the others. Not to reread, but to remember. I hosted Thanksgiving that year, not out of tradition, out of choice. Friends, colleagues, women who had their own stories of being sidelined, overwritten, dismissed quietly. We talked, we laughed, we didn't pretend. At the end of the night, one woman pulled me aside. "You seem grounded," she said, "like you stopped waiting for permission." I smiled. That's exactly what happened. Here is what I learned, and I say this for anyone listening who feels that slow, invisible erasure creeping into their life. Being loyal to people who betray you does not make you virtuous. It makes you available. Age does not make you powerless. Silence does. You do not owe anyone access to your life just because they share your blood or your history. Sometimes revenge isn't destruction. Sometimes it's refusal. Refusing to explain. Refusing to enable. Refusing to disappear quietly. I am not who I was when this began. I am stronger. I am clearer. I am finally living a life that belongs to me. If this story spoke to you, if you recognize yourself in any part of it, take a moment to like this video. Share your thoughts or your own experience in the comments. And subscribe to this channel if you want more stories about betrayal, karma, and the quiet power of choosing yourself. Because it is never too late to reclaim your voice. And once you do, no one can ever take it from you again.